presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
There's no saying, oh, those politicians, or oh, the whole thing's corrupt. We're part of it, right? And similarly, there's no such thing as not voting. For anybody who thinks, the game is so rigged, I'm not going to vote, right? Not voting is voting. Not voting is voting to hand power over to somebody who wants to lord it over you.
Coming up on Dialogue, as the United States becomes increasingly diverse, what keeps us unified as Americans? I talk with Eric Liu, the founder of Citizen University, who's trying to reinvigorate a sense of passion about being American. That's Dialogue next. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. When you hear the words civic education, what goes through your mind and perhaps even your body? For many, those words make them tune out and maybe even nod off. My guest today is trying to reclaim civic education from the doldrums. Eric Liu wants more Americans to think about what it means to live in this country and to act on their rights. His TED Talk on the subject has more than 1.5 million views. The founder of Citizen University in Seattle, Liu has a long history as a public intellectual. He's the author of more than 6 books, including Gardens of Democracy, Guiding Lights, The True Patriot, and The Accidental Asian. Liu is also the executive director of the Citizenship and American Identity program at the Aspen Institute. In the 90s, he was a speechwriter and deputy domestic policy advisor in the Clinton White House. Now, Mr. Liu is visiting Boise to learn more about civic engagement projects here, and he joins me now. Welcome.
It's so great to be with you.
It's nice to have you here. Before we talk about citizens, I'd like it if you'd set the scene for us as you see it in America today. You have written that we're living in what's called a centrifugal time. That's an intriguing phrase to me, about a centrifuge spinning and spinning and spinning. Talk a little bit more about that and what that means to you.
Well, I think when I describe our country right now, and this is about politics, it's about social life, it's about our media, we are getting spun out and sorted into smaller and smaller niches. And so the opportunities for people to come in common and share some language, share some understanding, share some stories, share some experiences in American life, those are diminishing, right? And we're getting sorted into ever smaller tribes, ever smaller flocks of a feather, right? And I think that's when you think about our entertainment choices and there being 500 channels and everybody finding their different niches online and offline, that's a big part of it. Well, that has civic and political consequences. People start spending more and more time with just a collection of people with whom they already share worldview and with whom they already agree. And I think that has really harmful consequences for our politics in the country, right? It just makes it really that much easier to demonize people who don't think, look, act, believe, worship like you. But it also makes it easier for people just to imagine that the whole world out there is pretty much like you and people who share your background. And I think that's one of the real challenges we face in the country right now and why we've got to have occasions like this where people can actually come together across those silos and those lines.
You've called this period of time the Third Reconstruction. That also was intriguing to me to read. Now, you say the second Reconstruction was the Civil Rights Movement. Why is this a third Reconstruction period?
Well, let's back up a step. I mean, I think among the big tectonic shifts in American life right now is just what's happening demographically. And it's just a set of facts. You can like it or not like it, but it's just what's happening, which is we are on a pathway to becoming a country where the majority is people of color, where whites are no longer the numerical majority. In fact, among new births in America, that day has already arrived, right? The majority of new babies are not white. That has all kinds of consequences. It's changing our cuisine, it's changing our popular culture, it's changing what we see in the media, it's changing our politics, right? Both in the sense of hopefulness in a lot of people who are claiming this country, and a sense of fear among a lot of people who feel like maybe they're losing their sense of this country. And I think that's the context that we're living in. And I think it's an exciting time. There's a lot of pain and a lot of ugliness and a lot of anxiety about it, but fundamentally I think it's exciting. And that's not just because I'm not white. I think it's exciting because we're getting a chance as a country to finally, truly deliver on the creed of our nation, right? And the creed that people, whatever their background, wherever their ancestors came from, get a chance to claim a place in the civic life of this country, is going to get put to the test in a way that it hasn't ever been before. And so, Reconstruction, post-Civil War, was one such period where we got to put the creed to the test, right? Were ex-slaves going to be integrated into political and civic life? And they were for a while, and then they weren't, right? And then you had many decades of Jim Crow, leading us to the second, what I think of as the second Reconstruction, which was the Civil Rights Movement, right? Which in many ways was truly, I mean, literally, if you think the language of Martin Luther King's speech on the March on Washington, an attempt to redeem what was in the promissory note of the American Creed in our creedal documents, right? And ensuring that African Americans really would gain first-class citizenship. Today, what I think of as the third Reconstruction is precisely this moment where we realize that for all the ways in which we have made progress, I'm not claiming that we're still stuck in 1954. There are a lot of ways in which we've made progress, and yet, nonetheless, outcomes in criminal justice, in education, in health and public health, in simple economic opportunity are still far worse for people of color than for people who are white, and still most intractably bad for African Americans. And so we're in the midst of a period right now where people, communities of color and their white allies are saying, we have to reconstruct again. We have to try again institutionally across lines of left and right to reform the criminal justice system, for instance, to break apart this prison industrial complex that we have. And there are people who are conservatives and progressives who agree that, yeah, something's got to change if we want to make good on equal opportunity.
You've written that Americanness and whiteness are fitfully, achingly, but finally becoming delinked. We're all going to have to learn a new way to be American. Now, going back to what you just mentioned, there are some for whom this is a very frightening prospect. They see the America that they know and love, the definition of America that they know and love, to be somehow eroded by multiculturalism, if that's what you want to call it. And they don't want to learn a new way to be American. How do you reach those people if you're trying to reach them?
Well, I think there's two core things that I would have in mind and have in heart, which is respect and compassion. I think it's too easy for people right now to say, oh, these angry white men or these angry whites who are flocking to one candidate or another because of all of these deep demographic transitions, let's just demonize them or let's mock them. No. Number one, respecting the fact that there are a lot of people who, in ways that don't have to do with race, just feel like, hey, I was part of a social contract here in this country, that if you work hard and you play by the rules, you advance a certain way. And because of the economics of our country and the ways in which inequality and the concentration of wealth in a smaller and smaller number of hands in our country has broken that deal and broken that contract, you have a lot of people, disproportionately white, who feel like, hey, the game changed. This isn't fair, right? I respect that feeling. I think our politics on both left and right are responding to that feeling right now. A lot of people who feel like the deal was broken, right? And I think the compassion piece is, look, anytime someone has felt like they've been part of a group that has had just the default setting of power, let's take it out of the context of race, put it in the context of gender. I'm a man, right? Society in 100 different ways bends silently and by default toward me rather than toward my daughter or toward my wife or toward you. And I have to look at that and say, number one, that's got to change. And number two, in changing that, it's not just for the benefit of you or my wife or my daughter, it's for the benefit of me.
But some would say, how is it for the benefit of me?
Because life is not a zero-sum game. It may look like if you're getting more opportunities that I'm getting less, but no, if you get more opportunities to have voice, to express your full imagination, to express your full potential, if my daughter does, then our community's stronger, my family's stronger, our country's stronger, we're a stronger team, right? And I think that's whether you're talking about gender or race, the way to think about the America that we are becoming is in many ways to think about team sports, right? Teams that succeed, not just in a one-off fluke victory, but teams that are successful year in, year out, decade in, decade out, are teams that are able to bring the most number of fit and able competitors to suit up and play. And if you are, by definition, restricting your roster and saying, you know what, we're going to give preference to people who are men, or we're going to give preference to people who are white, by definition, your team's not going to be as strong as it could be.
Let's take the religion part of it. How do you respond to people who see America as a Christian nation and are very fearful of different religions coming in, people with different religions coming into the country and somehow chipping away at that notion for them?
Well, it's just a reminder in part that there isn't anything new under the sun in American life, right? A couple hundred years ago, there are a lot of people who were white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who were terrified about the influx of papists, of Catholics coming in from Ireland, from Italy, from Southern Europe, and they were as demonized and as otherized as any group in American life today. And guess what happened? What happened over time was that they integrated into American life, that they brought, the traditions of faith, but also just their ambition and aspiration to be part of this realm of opportunity in the United States. And those immigrants then began to contribute to economic life, cultural life, civic life in a way that today, you think about our life and you think America is unthinkable without Irish Americans. America is unthinkable without Italian Americans, right? And I think that in just the same way, I have enough confidence in the capacity of this container that, yes, the origins of this country culturally and politically were among people who identify themselves as Christian. And the arrival of some relatively small number of people who identify with another faith is not going to undermine this nation. In fact, it's going to strengthen our capacity to learn from one another and to understand what are the core foundations of my faith and what I believe, and how can I live that in an environment that is complex and not simple.
You avoid the use of the term melting pot, do you not?
I do. Melting pot says you get people from all these different places of all different colors, and you boil them down till they're all roughly the same brown beige shade. They're all kind of the same. That's not what America has ever truly been, and it's certainly not what America is about now. The idea of multiculturalism, which you mentioned a moment ago, is not some invention of the last couple of decades. This country's been multicultural from the beginning, right? You think about the ways in which Native Americans, you think about the ways in which African Americans, Chinese Americans shaped the law, the land, the building of the railroads, every dimension of American life. We've been multicultural from the start, right? And so one of the projects that we run out of the Aspen Institute, where I run this program on citizenship and American identity, is called simply What Every American Should Know, right? And it's really asking people in this very broad-gauged way, what do you think all Americans should be literate in, right? If you bring people from Idaho with people from Mississippi, if you bring people from rural areas, people from urban areas, you bring people who are white or black with people who are Asian or Hispanic or Native American, what are some of the common references, cultural facts, historical facts that you feel like every American should know, right? And we invited people to send in your top 10, right? And this is a thing where it's not just George Washington, the cherry tree, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, but it also is knowing a bit about the Trail of Tears. It's knowing a bit about the internment of Japanese Americans in the Second World War. It's knowing a bit about Jim Crow and Reconstruction. And that's not just because other people are raising their hands now and saying, hey, include me in the story. It's because it's always been part of the story. And if we want to be real about who we are, we've just got to see that in a full spectrum way.
Let's go back to your list that you mentioned about and of cultural literacy. Why do you think it's so important for Americans of disparate entities to have this common creed, if you will, that you've written about? Why do we even need that?
You know, it goes back to the very first question you were asking me, Marcia, which is, are we flying apart, right? And not
in the
just,
centrifuge.
Yeah, in the centrifuge. It's not just our Democrats and Republicans super far apart, which they are, but are people of different generations flying apart? Are people of different, rural, urban? Are these divides widening, right? And they are in so many ways. Certainly economically, they are widening, right? And the thing that is exceptional about the United States, and I do believe in a particular notion of American exceptionalism, there is no other country on earth dedicated to a proposition, right? My parents, my ancestors came from China, right? There is no Chinese idea. In China, Chineseness is defined by blood, right? It is defined by, I could decide today to pull up stakes and move to China, and because I have Chinese blood, maybe I'd have a claim there, right? But if you were to move to China today, you wouldn't become Chinese, right? There is nothing about you genetically that is Chinese. And what makes the United States exceptional is we are bound together by a creed, we are bound together by a set of ideals, not by blood, not by tribe, not by faith, not by tests of any of those things, right? And so when you have this creed, you realize it's a fragile thing. It is a fragile thing to be bound together by a set of ideas that people after a while can just decide, you know what, I'm chucking those ideas, right? And so it becomes really important for every generation to renew an appreciation for what is in that creed, and also for the acts and facts of history and culture that have made that creed a vivid, living thing. Every generation. The beautiful thing about this play Hamilton, and if your viewers don't know about it, the genius of it is that it tells the story of Alexander Hamilton and the founding generation, and it's cast where everybody, with the exception of the King of England, who's cast in that play, is a person of color. And the whole play is done as a hip-hop rap musical, right? And on the one hand, you think, oh, well, that's only going to appeal to a very narrow segment of the public who likes hip-hop or, is into multiculturalism. No, this has become a runaway hit. People across the right as well as the left. Peggy Noonan of the Wall Street Journal just goes gaga over this musical. Why? Because it shows you that all of these old things of the creed weren't about the wig-wearing white men. They were about the ideas. And the ideas can be occupied and literally inhabited by a new generation of people who don't look like the old white guys in white wigs, but a new, more colorful, more diverse generation of people can claim the ideas, can engage in the same arguments about states versus federal, about liberty versus equality, about all of these things that make us American, right? And I think that's the beauty and the power of us, and we have to be intentional about renewing it.
You feel actually that just as immigrants who become naturalized take an oath to this country, that people who have been here their whole life should also take an oath as a citizen.
Well, it's not should, it's should get the chance to, right? I mean, I think if you've ever been to a naturalization ceremony and seen immigrants in the moment where they become United States citizens, it is unfailingly moving. Like, it's really, you get choked up watching it, right? And I've been to enough of these and spoken at some where I realized, man, wouldn't it be great to have something like this kind of civic ritual where people come together, they rise, they swear an oath together, you have readings of what you might think of as just civic scripture from the Declaration, from Gettysburg Address, but not just for new Americans, immigrants, but for everybody, right? People like us who had the dumb luck to be born here, but never got asked twice to think about what is the content of my citizenship. So we created this project called Sworn Again America, giving people a chance to, in a sense, renew their vows, to swear again. And we created a very simple, nonpartisan oath that is about serving and contributing to community and to country. And we've created this little template that organizations all around the United States now have run with and created their own Sworn Again American ceremonies. Veterans groups, Daughters of the American Revolution, immigrant organizations, student organizations. It's been very exciting.
You are passionate about this. Talk a little bit more about where that passion comes from, and perhaps a little bit more about your family.
I think the passion, part of it, I guess, is I'm wired that way. But a part of it, really, a big part of it has to do with being the child of immigrants. When you are the second generation, when you are the first generation born in this country, you are raised, I was raised with a very kind of ambient sense that you don't get to take anything for granted. Every opportunity you get comes with an equal measure of obligation, right? Or to put it another way, I just had the dumb luck to be born a United States citizen. I didn't do a thing to earn that, right? My parents, who were born in China, who fled communism in 1949 and went to Taiwan, and then who came to the United States in the 50s, and then naturalized as citizens here, they earned it, right? They earned it by coming, they earned it by showing up, they earned it by participating. And so being born here and having that dumb luck of just being by birth an American makes me very passionate about, you know what, I owe my family and I owe this country the sense of how am I going to show up every day and earn my Americanness.
Quick question for you, because we're rapidly running out of time. Who do you consider a citizen in these discussions? Does that person need to be here legally or just inhabiting the United States when you're talking about bringing people together?
Well, of course, the legal definition of citizen is about citizenship under the immigration and naturalization laws of the United States, right? But in my work at Citizen University, we use the word citizen in a broader sense. We use it in the way that you use it when you talk about, hey, that guy's a good citizen, right? Which is, are you a pro-social contributing member of the community, right? Are you a non-sociopath? Are you somebody who is not just looking out for yourself in a raw self-seeking way, but are you thinking about how we're woven together in this fabric of relationship and obligation with one another? And do you show up for other people, right? That sense of citizenship, it takes practice, it takes institutions to cultivate it, and it's not just a universal thing. It's a very American thing to have bottom-up, community-driven, whether it's faith-based or profession-based or neighborhood-based ways of engaging one another.
You have this passion. How do you engender it in others to want to show up and participate? A lot of people just say, I don't want to be bothered, or I've tried and it didn't work.
Yeah.
The other interests trumped mine.
Yeah. Well, interesting verb choice, but I think one of the things that is really important to remember about this issue in general is, if I just sat here and said, civic education, civic engagement, do your part, I would essentially be saying, eat your vegetables, go to bed by 9, that's not what I'm talking about here, right? In a sense, everything I'm describing here boils down to two ideas: power and ownership, right? Power is central, like the promise, the whole idea of us being in a democracy and being in a self-governing republic is, in theory, you and I are supposed to have power. In theory, you and I, as part of we the people, are supposed to be the deciders of stuff. In practice, every day, you can look around Idaho, you can look around the United States, we find ways in which that is not true, right? And one of the great obligations we have, not only to make good on this idea of citizenship, but actually just so that we can live more purposeful lives, is to claim our power, is to claim our voice. And that means getting literate and understanding who decides, how does stuff get done? Who decided on this compromise in the wilderness and this land management issue? Who decided on the question of refugees and refugee education? Who decided on whether a state chooses to engage in this healthcare policy or that healthcare policy, right? And realizing that I kind of have an opportunity to be part of that decision means I have power, right? But the other thing here is ownership. I'm claiming ownership, right? And I think there's a lot of ways in American life right now where people don't feel like they're in charge of anything. We feel like we're small wheels, small cogs in a big machine. And my work is about reminding people, particularly when you start at the local, that you own this place. There's no such thing as someone else's problem, right? And so if Boise is hurting, or this neighborhood in Boise is hurting, you own a piece of that. If Twin Falls is facing this problem or that trouble, you own that problem, right? There's a great billboard that I once saw by a super congested highway. Traffic was completely at a standstill, and the billboard said this. It said, "You're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic," right? And to me, that is the simple message here. There's no saying, oh, those politicians, or oh, the whole thing's corrupt. We're part of it, right? And similarly, there's no such thing as not voting. For anybody who thinks, the game is so rigged, I'm not going to vote, right? Not voting is voting. Not voting is voting to hand power over to somebody who wants to lord it over you, to hand power over to somebody whose interests may be inimical to your own, right? And so does voting alone solve things? No. Showing up 100 other ways is what solves things. And I think this is small d democratic life. Like, we own it. We run the community. And nobody, whether federal government or, a great executive or president, is going to come rescue us or save us. So we have to be the ones who heal the democracy.
Is there a room for incivility? Does it serve a purpose?
Is there room for incivility?
Yes, incivility. And does it serve a purpose?
It's interesting. Incivility is a little bit, I suppose, the canary in a coal mine, or the warning signal that there's sickness in the system, that there's something amiss, that people are not feeling heard. And to put it from the other angle, I don't think civility alone solves anything, right? If by civility you mean only let's be nicer to each other. What I want in American politics and American civic life is not the absence of arguments. I just want less stupid arguments, right? And so to the extent that arguments are stupid, ad hominem, mean, and uncivil, no use for that, right? But I want fierce, passionate, principle-driven arguments about whether you believe in a strong central government or a weak central government, whether you believe in collective action or individualism, right? Let's have those arguments about both the philosophy, but also how it plays out in the life of your city or your state or your town. And sometimes those arguments can get passionate and heated. And if that means sometimes they get a little bit uncivil, I'll take that if it means that people are engaging with one another. It's where they are both uncivil and backward-minded and stupid and not fact-connected that we get in trouble.
And what's next for you? You have a book coming out on power, on these issues, is that right?
I am working on a book right now on citizen power, and which is what my TED Talk was about, and really trying to unpack all the elements of what is power, what forms does it take, who has it, who doesn't have it, why is that, how do you exercise it? And I just really believe that the more people gain more fluency in this stuff, the healthier the entire body politic becomes.
Well, we will link to that as well as to the website for Citizen University. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me while you're here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
I appreciate it. You've been listening to Eric Liu, the founder of Citizen University and a frequent writer about civic engagement issues. To learn more, check out the Dialogue website. Just go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue. For Dialogue, I'm Marsha Franklin. Thanks for tuning in.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Check out our website, become a friend on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter.